Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this afternoon. Just quick housekeeping. We have the $150 off for this year's Pass Summit using the code list here in the slide. Today we have Dustin Ryan from the Microsoft TSP speaking. He'll be presenting Making Sense of the Power BI Ecosystem. Brian with Dustin, so we don't waste any more time. I can get you presenter so we can get it underway. Dustin, the floor should be yours.
Thanks, Jason. I'm sharing my screen now. Can you just confirm that you can hear me okay and that everything looks okay on your side?
Yep, everything looks good on mine.
Okay, all right, great. Thanks, Nathan and Jason. Thanks for having me coming to speak to Past BI virtual chapter. I always like to come and do these webinars and take part and interact with the community. So these are really great events. I love doing this, so thank you for having me. I'll be sharing my slides now. Like Jason said, my name is Dustin Ryan. I'm a data, I know the slides here says Data Platform Solution Architect, but they changed my title. I do the same thing, just with a different title now, I guess, but I'm a data TSP, and there's my email address on the screen. And this session is what I call Making Sense the Power BI Ecosystem. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I've been working in the data and analytics space for the past 10 years, been building Microsoft data and analytics solutions for I guess more than 10 years now, and currently I'm working for Microsoft, sort of doing the same thing for Microsoft for the past 3 years. You can find all my social media information there on the left side, and I do a lot of blogging at SQLdusty.com, and the material for this session is available for download at SQLdusty.com, and there's some other great resources there too that I'll share with you later. I spend my time wrangling my babies, and got a few chickens as well. Live in Jacksonville, Florida with my wife Angela and my 3 kids. So there's some pictures of my family and stuff. I'm Han Solo there. My wife is Leia, and then Andrew is Yoda. My daughter Dallas is Rey, and then Bradley is Luke Skywalker. So we like to have fun around Halloween time. But this session is called Making Sense of the Power BI Ecosystem, and it's really not meant to be an introduction to Power BI. I'm assuming that everybody in this session has probably at least heard of Power BI, even if you're not an expert, maybe even if you haven't used it before, or if your organization has used it before. So it's not meant to be an introduction to Power BI and sort of like how do you build things with Power BI, how do you share content. So there's not demos, and I'm not building stuff, and I'm not showing you how to do those types of things in this session. But really, this session is designed to give you an overall overview of the pieces of the Power BI ecosystem. I will spend one slide on, what is Power BI and what are some of the things you can do with it, but I'm not going to do any demos or anything like that. And then we'll go through an overview of the Power BI ecosystem. So we'll talk about desktop and Excel and some of these other things that you have here on the slide. And really the goal is to give you a good overview of the ecosystem, so that way you can understand what are the pieces to the ecosystem, and when I say Power BI, what does that mean? And the idea here is that we're going to eliminate some confusion and provide clarity on when do you use what pieces of the ecosystem. There's pieces in the Power BI stack that you probably use more frequently than others, or you might not use at all, depending on what your organization's requirements are and what type of functionality you need. The reason that I'm doing this session, and this is only the second time that I've done this session. I did this at a SQL Saturday event in South Florida a couple weeks back, and so I'm still kind of fine-tuning the session. But the reason I'm doing this session is because a lot has changed with Power BI in the last year. I mean, when you think of Power BI Premium, if you've been paying attention, you've heard about Power BI Premium. You've heard about the changes to Power BI Embedded. You've heard about Power BI Report Server. You know about all the changes that come with Power BI Desktop. And so Power BI changes a whole lot, and it changes really, really fast. There's also a lot of moving parts in Power BI. When I say, when somebody says, hey, are you using Power BI? What does that mean? I'm using Power BI. Does that mean I'm using a desktop tool? Does that mean I'm using a Power BI service? Does that mean I'm using Power BI Report Server? So there's a lot of moving parts here, and I was really inspired to do this session because a part of what I do at Microsoft is I help my customers understand when to use which pieces of Microsoft technology to help them meet their data requirements. And so, sometimes I have a conversation with a customer about that. They'll tell me, oh, we're using the desktop version of Power BI. We only want to use the desktop version. And as if there's only a version that runs on the desktop, and there's not a version that runs on the desktop. There's a desktop tool that you use on your desktop, but it's all part of the same ecosystem. And so I know that it can be confusing because it's changed a lot, because licensing has changed, because the pieces of the technology stack have changed. It can be confusing, and that's really the goal here at this session, is to understand what are the pieces and eliminate some confusion. Now, I've set up this architectural diagram, this little Visio diagram, to help understand how do all these pieces move together. And the pieces that we're going to be talking about here on this slide are, we're going to start with the desktop tool. We'll talk about Excel. We'll talk about the Power BI service. We'll talk about the gateway. How does that work? We'll talk about Power BI embedded. We'll talk about premium. We'll talk about iOS and how does that work, and then we'll also, almost forgot it down here, we'll talk about, not data tools, but the Power BI report server. Okay, so this is where we're going to spend our time. Now, I really hope that this will be interactive. I hope that you guys will ask questions. I mean, this is meant to be informational for you, so if you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat window. I think that would be a good thing. Chances are, if you've got a question, somebody else has got the same question, so feel free to type them into the chat window. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can always shoot me a message on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at SQL Dusty, and I'd be happy to point you in the right direction as best I can. So, what is Power BI? Power BI is a cloud-based analytics and reporting ecosystem that became generally available in middle of 2015. And prior to that, it was in a public preview for about 6 months, and went into public preview at the beginning of 2015, and then in GA in the middle of 2015. I think it was June. And Power BI is a cloud-based analytics and reporting ecosystem, and it lets you ingest data from a wide range of data sources. So there are dozens of connectors in Power BI that let you connect to things like relational databases, all types of files, online services, databases in the cloud, not just databases in Microsoft's cloud, Azure, but also databases that could exist in somebody else's cloud. It can connect to platform as a service technologies in Azure, in Google, and in AWS. And so it can connect to a really, really broad range of data sources. And then once you connect to that data, you can do all kinds of really cool things with it. You can do data modeling. You can produce these semantic models where I can do things like redefine relationships, build in calculations, build in hierarchies, KPIs, all these sorts of things, right? Do some really extensive data modeling. And then I can even mash up disparate and disconnected data sources. So if you think of this scenario where maybe I've got an enterprise data warehouse, and it's maybe it's a SQL Server database, Microsoft SQL Server, and then maybe I've also got this other data set that is running in AWS, the SQL installation in a VM in AWS, and then I've also got I've got this organization at work that is sort of doing their own Black Ops IT thing, and they got this Access database, right? And I want to connect to all of these different things at the same time. With Power BI, I can do that. I can establish connections to these different data sources at the same time, bring that data together, create relationships between these disconnected systems, and then build calculations so I can run my KPIs across all of these disparate data sources. I can also apply cleansing and transformation rules, and I think that's one of the big differentiators between Power BI and a lot of the other self-service and analytics tools out there, is that if you have dirty data, and who doesn't have dirty data, I can clean it up and I can model it and I can transform it however I want to. And the cleansing and transformation capabilities in Power BI are quite extensive, very extensive, even more so than any of the other self-service tools out there. And then once you build this great model, once you've brought your data together, you can build these really flexible and dynamic and interactive visualizations that work with one another. You can customize how the visualizations work. It's a really comprehensive and flexible visualization platform. One of the really cool things that the product team did with the visualization stack in Power BI is they open sourced it. So a lot of the code for the visualizations in Power BI you can download from GitHub, or you can also download custom visuals that other people have developed from a visualizations library. So they set up a visualizations library where you can download custom visualizations that other people are developing, some of them maybe from the product team, maybe from other third parties, and download them and use them in your reports. So if you've got this really specific requirement that just can't be met with a traditional bar chart or column chart or line chart or something like that, right? I can download custom visuals. There's a very good chance there's a custom visual that somebody else has already developed that will meet your requirement. But if not, you can even design your own custom visualizations and then import that into your reports and then and integrate that in with your solution. And then once you've built this great model, once you've cleaned up your data, once you've got these awesome visualizations and reports on top of your data, then I can distribute it to any user on any device. The Power BI service runs in the cloud, so that means I can get access to it from any location. So if I'm working at the office, certainly I'm going to be able to log in through my browser and get access to it. If I'm staying up late at night binge watching Gilmore Girls and I got to check my analytics and my reports, right, I can pull it up on my iPad while I'm sitting on my couch. Or if I'm catching a flight and I've got my phone in my hand and I'm on go-go Wi-Fi, right, I can pull up the Power BI app and access my content there. If you have a requirement to make your data and analytics publicly available, so if you want to create like a public version of a dashboard and share that and put that on your organization's website, you could certainly do that as well. And so it's a very extensive and a very capable analytics and reporting platform that was born in the cloud and that continues to run in the cloud. Now there is an on-premises aspect to this as well. We'll touch on that here in a little bit, but I sort of wanted to give you a high-level overview of what is Power BI, just so that you sort of have a general idea of what we're talking about here. So what we'll do first is we'll start with the Power BI desktop. We'll talk about Power BI desktop, and then we'll sort of move through the ecosystem here. Some of the things that we'll talk about as we go through the ecosystem here is, what are the components of the ecosystem? What do you use each component for? What does it do? What type of user would use it? Is it a developer tool? Is it an end user tool? Is it maybe like an administrator tool? And we'll talk about, where does each component get set up? And then I'll also try to touch in a little bit on cost and licensing and how does that work. Okay, so let's start with Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop is the main authoring and publishing tool for Power BI. This is the tool where you can connect to your data sources. You can define your cleansing rules, your ETL logic, how I want to shape my data, how I want to model it, clean it up. This is where I can build reports from scratch. And then this is where the tool that I can use to publish the data models and the reports into the Power BI service, where the end users will interact with that content. So if I'm a developer and I want to build a new reporting solution for my organization, chances are I'm going to start in Power BI Desktop so I can start consuming some data and modeling it and cleansing it, and then building some reports and visualizations that let me look at the data and do different things there, right? So the desktop tool is going to be primarily used by your developer team. Those would be your folks that are building Power BI content from scratch, or your power users that are particularly ambitious and they understand the data and they understand how to connect to a database or an existing analysis services model or an existing Power BI data model, and then create their own reports, right? Power BI Desktop is designed to be very user-friendly, so you don't necessarily have to be a technical user to gain a lot of value out of this. You don't have to understand how to write functions and queries and all those sorts of things. If you're a non-technical person, you're going to be able to get really far with Power BI Desktop. Now, if you do come from a technical background, I think that's really helpful, because even though Power BI Desktop is designed to be very simple and easy, it could certainly be as complicated as you want it to be. So if I want to do things like build really complex time calculations in Power BI, right, I can do that. If I want to apply build functions and things in Power BI Desktop, you could certainly do that, but you don't necessarily have to have a technical background to gain a lot of value out of Power BI Desktop. So Power BI Desktop gets installed on your workstation. Now, somebody like me, right, I'm working with customers very often, doing proofs of concepts and designing things for internal use at Microsoft and doing those sorts of things. I have Power BI Desktop on my workstation. I use it pretty much every day to check my reports, to check things that I'm building, to work with customers and things. So I have Power BI Desktop on my workstation. Now, Power BI Desktop gets updated once a month. So if you've been paying attention to Power BI, you know that the desktop tool gets updated once a month. You can download it through the Microsoft Store. If you're running on Windows 10, download it from the Microsoft Store. It gets automatically updated, so when a new version comes out, you automatically get the latest and greatest update. And you can also download it from PowerBI.com. The really cool part about the desktop tool is that it's absolutely free. It costs $0, also known as free. So whether you're a Microsoft customer or not, you can actually go and download Power BI Desktop at no cost and start doing some of these things that we've talked about, setting up data models and data cleansing logic and building reports and visualizations and all those sorts of things, right? So it's a great place to get started with Power BI. And so when people say, hey, how do we get started with Power BI? First thing I say is go download the desktop tool, because that'll let you start doing things immediately, and you can do all the things that we just talked about, building all the cool content from scratch. And then in the slide deck here, you've also got a link to go download this and start doing all the things that we talked about. Now, as I said, Power BI Desktop is where you build your content from scratch. It's not the only way to create Power BI content, but it's probably one of the main ways. There's a few other ways that you can create Power BI content that you want to share within your organization, but the desktop tool is probably one of the main ways to do that, or it definitely is the main way, not the only way. Now, Power BI has a very special, and it has several very special integration points with Excel. So if you've been in the Microsoft BI space for a while, you probably are familiar with technologies like Power Pivot and analysis services, or you're familiar with Power Query in Excel or Power View in Excel, right? So, back in the day, right, we were developing Power Pivot, and for self-service BI, right, Microsoft self-service BI story was, let's do Power Pivot in Excel, right? And I can build these really cool data models, and then I could even do Power Query to ingest some data and apply some cleansing logic to it, and then build these interactive reports using Power View. And I could do all of that within Excel. Well, those technologies, Power Pivot, Power View, and Power Query, those are the foundational technologies for Power BI. And so if you think of Power Pivot and Power Query and Power View, if they had a baby, it would be Power BI. It'd be a weird baby, but that weird baby is Power BI. And so in Excel, I can continue to develop data models using Power Pivot and then automatically import those or convert those into Power BI data models. So if you're currently doing things with Power Pivot and Excel, building these cool data models, you can just convert those into Power BI data models automatically instead of having to rebuild the wheel from scratch, right? If you have an Excel workbook that has a Power Pivot data model, and maybe you've got a few Power View reports in Excel, I can also convert those Power View reports into visualizations in Power BI. So if you've already made heavy investments in Excel for analytics, and a lot of customers have, a lot of organizations have, you can take those investments and continue to build on them with Power BI. Now, certain things that you've done in Excel, you may not want to convert those into Power BI data models. So one of the really neat integrations that Excel and Power BI have together is that I can take an Excel workbook and I can publish that directly into the Power BI service. So I could take an Excel workbook that I have that already exists, publish it into the Power BI service, wrap Power BI security around that, and let users interact with the pivot tables and the pivot charts that exist in my workbook directly in their browser through the Power BI service if they have permissions on that. So I can take some of those investments that I made in Excel, sort of move away from what we call, fondly call it Excel hell, right? Where everybody's got spreadsheets and we just sort of email them all over the place, and we don't know who can see what data, and we don't know who should see what data. We just email these spreadsheets right all over the place, right? We can move away from that. I can put my Excel workbooks in Power BI, wrap Power BI security around that, and then have my users interact with pivot tables and pivot charts. Another really cool integration between Power BI and Excel is that if you have a great data model that you've built in Power BI, Maybe like the example we talked about before, right, where I've got a SQL data warehouse, and then I've got this other SQL database that's running in AWS, and then I've got this Access database here, and I'm gonna mash this data up together, and then I publish it out into the Power BI service where we give other users access to it. Right, a user that really loves to use Excel can open up a direct connection to that data model using Excel and do pivots right on top of that data model on their local workstation. So if I'm a user that just loves Excel and I don't really care about the flashy charts and visualizations that you have in Power BI, I can continue to do things in Excel. Most organizations that I've ever worked with, they've always got this, everyone seems to always have this hardcore group of data users, right? They want to do things with pivot tables and pivot charts, and they just want to look at rows and rows of data in Excel. They can continue to do that, but now we can give them access to data models in Power BI and secure those data models and let the user decide whether they're going to use Power BI to browse those models, or Excel, or even something else in the future. But there's a special plugin that gets installed on Excel to allow you to interact with, that makes your interaction with the Power BI data models and very seamless. It's called the Power BI Publish for Excel, and the Power BI Publisher for Excel is $0, right? No tacos. So there's no additional cost for you to use the Power BI Publisher for Excel. Obviously, Office 365 and Excel, those aren't totally free. But the Power BI Publisher for Excel is a free download that you can use. So some of the things that you can do with the Power BI Publisher, and you see there directly on the toolbar on the screen, is that if I've got a range of cells or a pivot chart in Excel, I can take that and pin that directly into a Power BI dashboard. I can also open up you see that little button there that says Connect to Data. I can also open up a direct connection to a Power BI data model and build pivots on top of that directly, and do all kinds of cool things there. So you have this really, really tight integration between Power BI and Excel. If you come from an Excel background, and who in this day and age doesn't at least know a little bit about Excel, whether you are a casual Excel users, most people know how to work with a pivot table. Most people know how to build a basic Excel formula, right? How to sum up a column or do those sorts of things, right? If you come from some familiarity with Excel, you're going to be able to pick up Power BI pretty quickly. So if you've worked with Power BI or worked with Excel a little bit, you're going to feel very at home with Power BI. And even if you're not super familiar with Excel, you're still going to be able to gain a lot of value out of Power BI, because, like I said, you don't have to be a technical expert to gain a lot of value from using Power BI. So we've talked about Power BI Desktop as the desktop authoring and publishing tool. We've talked about Excel. Excel is another way for me to author content on my desktop and also interact with data models that I have access to in Power BI. Once I've created my great content using Excel or using Power BI Desktop, how do I give other people access to it? Right, I've done this great stuff, and at this point, and I'll flip back over here to my slide, right, I'm just working on my desktop, right? You guys see that over here on the left side. I'm just working on my desktop, right? Nobody else can see that unless I package up that file and send it over to them, and that's probably not totally realistic for me to be building these data models and just emailing them all over the place or sharing them that way. Once I've built this great stuff on my desktop, how do I give other people access to it? Well, the way to do that would be to publish into the Power BI service. And so that's what we're going to talk about next here. Okay. So the Power BI service is an online software as a service that is a fully managed service by Microsoft, where you publish your Power BI data models, your reports, you create dashboards, and that's where all of that content is hosted at. And this is where I grant other people access to this content. Power BI uses Azure Active Directory for identity management, and so I can manage who gets access to what piece of data that I'm making available in the Power BI service. This is also where administration happens of the Power BI service, so where I control who gets access to which group. This is where I can manage who is part of what security role. This is also where I can manage collaboration, access to bundles of Power BI content that we call apps. And so the Power BI service is really the center of the wheel here for the whole Power BI ecosystem. This is where you publish content. This is where administration happens. This is where sharing and collaboration happens, and this is where just management of the whole Power BI shebang happens. Okay, and because of it's the center of the wheel here, most everybody is going to use this. So if you're a developer and you're building your content, right, you're probably going to start in Power BI Desktop, but then once you're ready to give other people access to it, you're going to publish it to the Power BI service. If you're a consumer, if you're an end user of this content, you may not do a lot of building from scratch, but you're going to be logging in through the browser, right, accessing your content, viewing the reports that have been shared with you, viewing the apps and the app workspaces, and then navigating through that content. If you're a power user, you're going to be using it as well. And if you're an administrator, if you're the Office 365 admin, if you're the Power BI admin, right, you're going to be using the Power BI service to ensure that your data is secured, that the work that's being done there is happening in a managed way, right? There's some governance around all of that, right? So, most everyone is going to be using the Power BI service, okay? Now, in order to have access to the Power BI service, you need a license. And there are two types of per user licenses you can have in order to gain access to the Power BI service. There is a free license, and that lets, and there's a free license. We'll do a compare and contrast here in a second here. But there's a free license, and then there's a pro license, and these are per seat licenses. Okay, so the pro license is the Mac Daddy license, and that gives you all the capabilities of Power BI, and that starts at $10 per user per month, right? Okay, and the free license, like I said, it's free. So what is the difference between the free and the pro license? Okay, a free license, you can think of the free license as Power BI for the individual. So if I'm a person that is just doing BI on my own, I don't collaborate with other people, I don't share with other people, I'm just doing some things on my own, right? I would probably use the Power BI free license. And the free license would allow me to use the desktop tool, consume consume data, model it up, clean it up, create a cool report, and publish it into the Power BI service. And then once I do that, I can then access it from any browser, any mobile device, wherever I happen to be located at. I can also schedule a refresh of the data automatically, so that way when data in my database changes, I schedule that refresh and the data automatically gets updated at whatever interval I set it up for. Okay, so that's what the free version allows me to do. Now the pro version, the pro license, allows you to do all of that as well, plus it gives you the ability to share content within your organization. I can share and collaborate. So if I'm a free user and I upgrade to the pro license, then I can create content, I can share it with other people, and then they can view that content if they have a pro license too. The pro license also allows me to do things like have row level security on a data model. It also allows me to do things like have a direct query connection from a Power BI data model to a SQL database, or an Oracle database, or Teradata, or SAP HANA, or whatever other supported data bases there are for direct query. Okay. Now, the pro license, like I said, gives you the ability to collaborate and share content. And so the pro license is required if you want to share content or if you want to view shared content. And so you're probably thinking about now, well, what if I have, I need to share content with the whole organization? Are you telling me that I've got to give everyone in my organization a pro license if they just only want to look at content? They only want read access. They're not going to build stuff, they just want to read access. And the answer to that is yes, they would need a pro license unless you have premium. And we'll talk about premium. Oops, I didn't mean to cross that out, but we'll talk about premium here in a few minutes, and how that changes, who needs to be licensed in what way. Okay, so we'll drill into that a little bit here. But the Power BI service, this is the center of the wheel that makes everything that makes Power BI work. Okay. All right. Now, once I've published my content into the Power BI service, right, I've got to keep it up to date. Otherwise, the data is just static, it's stale, and it's not automatically being updated. And in order to facilitate that the updating of that data and making sure that it's always staying up to date, and that my users can trust that the data they're looking at is the latest version of the truth, right? For our organization, we need the Power BI Data Gateway for those connections that are into our on-premises network. So the data gateway acts as the bridge between the Power BI service and your on-premises data sources, whether you're just doing an import into Power BI, whether you're using direct query or live query into your on-premises network. The data gateway is the bridge that acts as that connector between the Power BI service. Now, you only need the gateway if you're connecting to data sources that exist on premises or in a VNet in Azure or in a virtual network in another cloud, right? And a VNet is just essentially it's an extension of your network. So if we're going to be connecting into a VNet in Azure, you've got SQL running in a VM in Azure, and you want to connect to that, right? You need the data gateway for that. If you're connecting into if you're connected to a SQL database or an Excel file or a CSV file or something that is on a file share somewhere or something like that in your local network, you got to have the data gateway. So the data gateway is required if you're connecting into those types of data sources. Now, you don't need the data gateway if you're connecting to Azure platform as a service data technologies. For instance, if I have an Azure SQL database, right, that's that platform as a service flavor of SQL Server in Azure. If I have an Azure SQL DB, I don't need a gateway to keep that up to date with Power BI, to keep Power BI up to date with that data. If I'm using Azure Analysis Services, again, I don't need the gateway in that situation. If I'm using Azure SQL Data Warehouse, right, those are all platform as a service database technologies. I don't need the data gateway in order to keep my data up to date in Power BI. If I'm using SQL Server running in a VM in Azure, I do need the data gateway. If I'm connecting to an Oracle database that is on premises, I do need the data gateway for that. So I hope that sort of makes clear sort of when you need the data gateway. Now that data, in order to facilitate that connection between the Power BI service and your on-premises data sources, that data gateway needs to be installed somewhere within your on-premises environment that has line of sight to the data sources that are being consumed by Power BI. So just as an example here, I'll draw a couple of diagrams here. If I've got an Excel file here, right, and it's in my network, and I'm going to draw a dotted line here, okay, and we'll say this is the cloud over here, okay, and then this is my network. Those are supposed to be buildings, okay, and I've got a Power BI data model over here. We'll call this Power BI, okay, and I want Power BI to connect to that Excel file and do a scheduled refresh. I need the data gateway in place to make that happen, okay, so we'll call this data gateway, okay. That data gateway gets installed on my network somewhere that has line of sight to that Excel file. The same is true if I have a SQL database, right? And I want to import some data into Power BI, or even if I want to do a direct query against SQL, right? I need to have that data gateway on premises somewhere in my environment that can see these data sources. So that way I can do the scheduled refresh. That way I can do the live query, the direct query into the database. Now, the way this data gateway works is that it's always looking out to the Azure Service Bus. Okay, there's another piece here that I didn't include in my diagram, but I want to just let you know that it's there. So that way, when a user clicks on a report in Power BI that generates a query, or a scheduled refresh activity happens that generates a query, that request gets sent down to the Azure Service Bus. And this data gateway is continually looking outward at the Azure Service Bus, and it's polling it for activity. So the data gateway is looking at the Azure Service Bus, and it's saying, hey, is there a query? 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 And so you click on a report, it generates that T-SQL, sends it to the Azure Service Bus. The data gateway sees that. It's looking outward to make that connection. It sees that, and then it goes back to the SQL server, returns the results back, and then the report gets updated in Power BI. And this is important to understand how this works, because that means that the data gateway, it looks outward to establish that connection. This doesn't require you to open up any inbound ports. You're only using outbound ports these reports that you probably have open already. But this is all covered in the documentation. But I did want to share with you just sort of a little bit how that data gateway service works. Now, this is most likely going to be, I'm going to erase all this. This is going to be installed by someone in IT on a server somewhere that has sufficient resources to act as the gateway. Okay, so from a usage perspective, it's going to be installed and managed by your IT or your Power admin, Power BI admin. Now there is a personal version of this that will facilitate only a scheduled refresh and can be used by a Power BI free user. But that's a little bit different. That would be, in that case, that would be that probably a power user would be installing that on their laptop or something like that. But this is going to be installed and managed by your IT Power BI admin, whoever is responsible for that. And then users that are accessing the reports would be by default leveraging that gateway in order to take advantage of that scheduled refresh or that live connection to those data sources. There is no cost for the gateway. So there's no additional cost for just using that to set that up. So once you start using Power BI, you can download the gateway and set that up in your environment. And so I've got a link there to that in the slide deck. If you click on the link, that'll take you to how to download that. And there's plenty of good documentation too on PowerBI.com about, what does the data gateway in enterprise mode mean? What does it mean in personal mode? But this slide here basically shows you the differences. The on-premises data gateway in enterprise mode can be shared across multiple users. It can be used by Power BI, Power Apps, Logic Apps, Flow. You can support scheduled refresh and live query. And then the personal gateway can only be used by one person, and it only supports scheduled refresh. And so most organizations are going to be using the on-premises data gateway, and it was formerly known as the enterprise data gateway. And then the Power user that is doing things on their own will probably be using the personal gateway if they're a Power BI free user. Okay. Now, this leads us to Power BI Premium, and Power BI Premium came out last year, and it really was in response to giving organizations the ability to make Power BI available across an entire organization. So you remember when we were talking about Power BI Pro, right? And we said that if you want to share and collaborate in Power BI, then everyone has to have a Pro license. And that was true until Premium came out. And it was really messy before Premium, because if I had 10,000 people that wanted to use Power BI and they wanted to share and collaborate together, then everyone had to have a Pro license. Okay. And so it was kind of ugly. Then Premium came out, and that solved a lot of those issues for us. Power BI Premium is a way for an organization to obtain resources dedicated to running to the Power BI service, dedicated to your organization or your team, giving you more dependable performance and a lot more flexibility for how you work with your data. And it enables widespread distribution of your Power BI content to not just pro users, but also free users. So that means that if I'm a developer, I would use a pro license because I'm going to share some content. So I build my cool stuff in Power BI, I publish it in the Power BI service, and my organization purchases a premium. So I take my content, I put it on my premium capacity, right? That's a virtual capacity that's associated with Power BI. And then I can give anyone in my organization access to it, whether they're a free user or a pro user. Now, Premium does a lot more than just giving free users access to your Power BI content. It also allows you to take Power BI content and embed it in your custom applications. So if you've got this custom app that your organization is designing or that you're designing, and you want to have analytics in the app, you want to show some visualization in the app, right? You can use Power BI Premium to host your content and then make that content available in the application. So I can do embedding in custom apps. Now, Power BI Premium is not per user licensing like the Power BI Free and the Power BI Pro subscriptions are. Power BI Premium is licensed at a capacity level instead of by individual users. So there are different amounts of capacity that you can purchase, sort of like when you purchase a VM in Azure, right? You have different sizes with different amounts of resources that you can have, and Power BI Premium is the same way. I have different capacity levels that I can purchase depending on what sort of requirements my organization has. Okay. Now, Power BI Premium is an add-on for the Power BI service, and it's basically your own private server running the Power BI architecture in Azure. And so to understand why that's important, you have to I think it helps to understand how Power BI in the shared environment works. So if you think of Power BI outside of Premium, Power BI runs on clusters of machines that all the Power BI customers use. And because all these customers are using the same set of hardware, right? Power BI places restrictions on how much capacity and resources an individual can use so that no one single user has this really negative experience, right? So it's a way that we sort of reduce the likelihood that you run into the noisy neighbor type scenario, right? So you're not using the same cluster of machines that are really big customers using, and that's sucking up everybody's resources. And so we put throttles in place in order to ensure that no one single user has this really negative experience. But when you purchase Power BI Premium, that capacity is all yours. Because the capacity of the Power BI Premium service belongs to you, this allows many of the restrictions and limitations in the Power BI service to be lifted, giving you greater control over how you leverage those resources that are dedicated to you. So this allows you to give access to your free users, Power BI free users, whether they have a pro license or a free license. I can give read access to those folks. If I have a requirement for larger data models, I can use Power BI Premium, right, which has a higher threshold for how much data I can ingest into Power BI. If I have a really aggressive refresh requirement, Power BI, and I need to refresh a data model, 40 times a day, right? I can do that with Power BI Premium. And so because it's your dedicated instance Power BI service for your organization, you've got a lot more flexibility over how you leverage those resources. Okay, so let's walk through an example here that I hope will make this clear about sort of what licenses you need, who can get access to what, how Premium works, all that sort of thing. Okay, so say you've got a requirement to distribute Power BI reports and dashboards to your entire organization, or it's at least a large number of members of your organization. And so prior to Power BI Premium, you would need to purchase a pro license for your development team. Those are the guys over there on the left, the dark blue guys on the left. And you would also need to give a pro license to the consumers. Those are the people that are just going to log in and just look at the reports and the dashboards that the development team is making available. So like I said, this can make life difficult if you have a large number of users that are wishing to access that content. And so if you had 30,000 users, for example, purchasing pro licenses for those users is going to be really expensive, and it's going to be difficult to manage, right? Because remember, the pro subscriptions are the per user licensing. Now with Power BI Premium, you now have the flexibility to deploy your Power BI content to that dedicated capacity. And this would allow the members of your organization to access their Power BI content without the requirement that they have a Power BI Pro license. So your developers would still be licensed for Power BI Pro, as they're the users that are doing the creating and the sharing and administration and all that sort of cool stuff. But the consumers of the content would no longer require a Pro license. Because the Power BI content deployed to your dedicated capacity via Power BI Premium, this means that you can also scale up when you need to by purchasing more capacity. So if you initially roll this out to 5,000 users, and then in the next year you're going to roll it out to more than 5,000 users, you purchase that capacity when you need it. There's no need to sort of go the way of the old world of BI, where you're going to buy a big honking server because at some point in the future it's going to get used a lot. But until then, we just got this big server that's seeing minimal usage, right? In Power BI and in Azure, right? I purchase the capacity that I need when I need it, as opposed to buying all of that capacity up front and sinking cost, right? So Power BI Premium gives you a way to purchase the capacity when you need it and make it available to the users that need access to it on a much more efficient basis. Okay. Now, this brings us to the next part here. Power BI embedded, and I'm going to try and move through quickly here. We've only got about 15 minutes. I want to try and leave some time available at the end for questions and things, but I want to move through this quickly. Power BI embedded allows you to develop and embed analytics into any app using the Power BI APIs. with Power BI Embedded, Power BI Embedded is an Azure service that I can subscribe to and that I can leverage in order to scale up, scale down, and pause services when I need analytics in a custom application. Power BI Embedded is different than Power BI Premium, and we'll talk about what are some of the differences here between Power BI Premium. But Power BI Embedded is different than Premium because with Power BI Embedded, I can embed my visualizations and analytics in custom applications, but I don't access them through the Power BI portal, which typically you access through your web browser. Power BI Premium, I can access my content through my web browser. I can log in, go to powerbi.com, sign in, view that. With Power BI Embedded, I don't do it that way, right? I'm accessing the embedded analytics through the application. Power BI Embedded, the people that are going to be working with Power BI Embedded are going to be strictly developers. Those are the ones that are writing the application and embedding the visualizations into the app. And of course, the consumers and the users of the app will see the visualizations in the application. They may not necessarily know it's Power BI. The only thing that they'll know is that I've got an app that has charts and graphs in it, and I can see them and interact with them and do cool things like that. Power BI Embedded, like I said, is an Azure service, and it's managed in the Azure portal, and it starts at about $1 an hour, okay? And then it sort of goes up from there. Now there are a handful of different SKUs associated with Power BI Embedded, and the Power BI Premium service. You have the A SKUs, and you see that there in the top, the second from the left column. The A SKUs, those are the Azure service SKUs, the Power BI Embedded SKUs. That's the service that you use if you want to only embed visualizations into your app. You don't care about putting the visualizations in SharePoint Online. You don't care about putting them in Teams. You don't care about accessing through the Power BI service. You want a service that allows you to embed your visualizations in your application. You want to scale it up when you need more horsepower. You want to scale it down when you need less horsepower, or you want to be able to turn it off, right? The A SKUs give you the ability to run the service and get billed by the hour, and pause and even pause the service or scale it way down, okay? The E SKUs are associated with Premium and allow you to embed in a custom application, embed in SharePoint Online and Teams, and it's billed at the month level, right? So we're not scaling this up and down and turning this off and on, right? There's a fixed amount of capacity depending on the SKU that you purchase, and these are the ways that you can access the content. With Power BI Premium, Premium lets you do all of these things. I can embed in a custom application. I can embed in SharePoint Online and Teams. I can access my reports through the Power BI app, through the Power BI service, through my browser, and this is billed at the month level. Okay. So if you're looking at the SKUs for Power BI and you're wondering, well, which one do I need? Hopefully this chart will make this a little more easier for you to understand. Okay. Now, I added a little asterisk here on this slide because we talked about that Power BI is a cloud-based analytics and reporting tool, but you do have some Power BI capabilities on premises, and this is through Power BI Report Server. Power BI Report Server is SQL Server reporting services plus the ability to host a Power BI desktop report. Okay, so Power BI Report Server is everything that you can do with SQL Server reporting services, plus I get the additional capability to host a Power BI desktop report. Now, to be clear, Power BI Report Server is not Power BI just on premises running on a server in my environment, because there are a lot of capabilities that you have in Power BI service in the cloud that you don't have in Power BI Report Server. And likewise, there are currently some capabilities in Power BI Report Server that don't exist in Power BI service in the cloud. Now, Microsoft's strategy has always been to let's bring these products closer together from a feature standpoint and bring these things closer to feature parity. But right now, the capabilities between Power BI Report Server and the Power BI service are a little different. Power BI Report Server gets updated every 4 months, and this is going to be installed and managed just like you would SQL Server reporting services. So if you have experience with SSRS, think of Power BI Report Server as exactly the same thing. The Power users can modify their Power BI reports, but they need to have the desktop tool installed on their local machine in order for them to modify the reports. And the other point I'll make here as well is that there is a different version of Power BI Desktop that you use to work with Power BI Report Server. So if you're using Power BI in the cloud, there's a version of Power BI Desktop that you need for that. If you're using Power BI Report Server, there's a different version. And the reason for that is Power BI in the cloud gets updated once a month. And so we roll out new features to Power BI in the cloud very aggressively, all kinds of new features every month. Power BI Report Server does not get updated that frequently. And so there's a different version that you would use, a different version of Power BI Desktop that you would use if you were using Power BI Report Server. Now, there's two ways that you can obtain Power BI Report Server. If you buy Power BI Premium, you automatically gain the rights to deploy Power BI Report Server on an equivalent number of cores on premises. So if you buy Power BI Premium, you automatically get Power BI Report Server. You're licensed to deploy that anywhere. If you have SQL Server, if you have a server that is licensed for SQL Server Enterprise Edition with a software assurance benefit, you can also deploy Power BI Report Server on premises. So there's two ways you can obtain Power BI Report Server. Of course, you can always, just like SQL Server, you can install it for free if you're using a development and test scenario. So if you just want to play with it, if you want to download it and see how it all works and everything, you can do that for free, right? You can install it in a development environment for free. But for your production workloads, that does need to be licensed. You either need to have Power BI Premium or a licensed server with SQL Server Enterprise Edition with software assurance. Okay, and there's the link to download Power BI Report Server. Now, I mentioned earlier that Power BI Report Server is not everything you can do in the Power BI service on premises. And likewise, Power BI Report Server, all the capabilities you have in Power BI Report Server, you don't have in the Power BI service. And so I've got the slide here to do a sort of a quick compare and contrast from a feature standpoint to help you understand what sort of things you get from each service. And we don't have time to go through everything here on this slide, but I did want to put it here in the slide deck so that way you have it and that way you can review it. There are a couple of things here that I'll point out, and I tried to highlight them here. The release cycle is going to be different. Power BI Report Server gets updated once every 4 months, and then the Power BI service gets updated once a month. Creating Power BI reports in the browser, you can do that with the Power BI service. Power BI Report Server doesn't support creating content directly in the browser. Any Power BI content that you create for Power BI Report Server will happen in the Power BI desktop tool. Okay, so that's another difference between the two pieces of the stack here. Power BI Report Server does not let you do creation of content in the browser. Power BI service does. Q&A. You guys have probably seen Q&A. That's the really neat natural query language feature where I can type in a question into a chat window, sort of like a chat text box, and Power BI will generate the visualization. That's supported in Power BI service. Power BI Report Server does not do that. Analyze in Excel. Browsing data model, Power BI data models in Excel, you can't do that with Power BI Report Server. You can do that with the Power BI service. Paginated reports. You can do in the Power BI Report Server. You cannot currently do that in the Power BI service. Now, this is going to change in the very near future, but for now, you currently do not have the capability to take an RDL file, an SSRS report, and publish that into the Power BI service. But that's going to change quickly, and I'll have to update the slide. Email subscriptions for paginated reports. Obviously, paginated reports only exist in Power BI Report Server, so that's a differentiator here too. Data-driven subscriptions is another thing that Power BI Report Server can do that the Power BI service can't do. Preview features get released in the Power BI service, so new capabilities that come out for preview, you'll see those first in the Power BI service. And then we talked about the Power BI desktop. There's a version that's optimized for Power BI Report Server, and there's a version that's optimized for the Power BI service. All right. We're almost done here. We'll wrap up quickly. Mobile apps. You've got mobile apps on iOS, Android, and Windows. These are free to download. So if you have a wide range of users that are using iPhones and Android phones, and let's be real, probably nobody is using Windows phones. But if you do have those users that are using Windows phones, you can download the mobile apps for free. And this can be managed using Microsoft Intune, and you can use the mobile apps to view your reports and your dashboards that are hosted on the Power BI service, as well as reports that are on Power BI Report Server. So you can use the apps to get access to your reports on your mobile devices. Now, I will say, if you are using the Power BI service in Azure, the reports and dashboards are just automatically going to be available on your mobile devices. If you're using Power BI Report Server, there's a few more hoops you have to jump through in order to make that content available externally on mobile devices. It's really, really easy to do on Power BI service. There's actually no work you have to do in the Power BI service except you download the mobile app, you log in, and you get access to all your content. But if you're using Power BI report server and you want to make that available to externally on mobile devices, there's some extra work to make that happen. But like I said, the apps, these are all no cost. They're free to download, so you can go download these right now. So if you're using Power BI right now and you're not using the mobile apps, you should really go download the mobile app because you can get access to all of your content without any extra work. All right. Now the last thing that I'll mention here is the Common Data Service. And this isn't even out yet, but this is something that if you've been paying attention closely to Power BI, you've probably heard of the Common Data Service for Analytics. And traditionally, when you think of the big data challenge, right, and you think of, well, how do you build an advanced analytics and a big data type solution in Azure, right, you're going to think about, okay, well, how do I ingest all the data from these separate and disparate services and apps into a big data storage, something like Azure Data Lake or SQL Data Warehouse or something like that, right? And then once I ingest that data, right, I got to clean it up, right? We've got to transform it and get it in a shape that's suitable for end user consumption. And then I've got to build a data model on top of that has my security, and I got to have security wrapped around the whole thing, right? And I've got to predefine relationships, and I got to do all these sorts of things, right? And then on top of that, I've got to automate the entire process so that this integrated data set is refreshed every time the underlying data change. And so when we think of this like entire process, right, we think of like data warehousing, right? And that's the challenge with data warehousing, right? Is that you've got to build all of these pieces of the stack from end to end. Right? It's not easy and it's a lot of work. Well, the Common Data Service for Analytics is a way for me to basically package all of those steps into the Power BI service, so I have one place to manage that and one place to integrate the data set, one place to clean it, one place to secure it, and one place to visualize it. And so the Common Data Service for Analytics uses a known schema and data model instance for which reports and dashboards and natural query language and other quick insights can automatically be created. So the data that's brought into the Common Data Service Analytics format, it's held in the organization's tenant-based data pool instance in Azure, and it uses a specified schema and data model that can be customized and get you up and running very quickly with Power BI for your entire organization. So it's at the end of the day, the Common Data Service for Analytics is supposed to be this standardized and extensible business app schema to support data integration and analytics. Now, this is going to be available for Power BI Pro and Premium, but it's not available yet. It's supposed to be in public preview very soon, but it's not quite available yet. So, and because of that, I don't have any pricing or how that's going to change pricing, or if it might change pricing, or if there's any additional costs or anything like that. I don't know any of those answers to that question. But this will be available very shortly in Power BI. And so I did want to share this with you just so that you can be on the lookout for that. If you're really interested in something like this, and this sounds like something your organization would be interested in, there's a link down here in the bottom of this slide so that you can get signed up so you can be notified when there's updates on the Power BI Common Data Service for Analytics. So I did want to put that here in this. So I really hope that this has helped give you a better understanding of the entire Power BI ecosystem. I hope that this has been helpful for you. The slide deck here is available to download on SQLdusty.com. You can download this architectural diagram as well. You can download the PDF version of this and feel free to use it in your presentations, or chop it up or do whatever you're going to do with it. Use it for your own evil, nefarious purposes. I'd like again to say thank you to Nathan and Jason for hosting this and letting me come and present. There's my contact information up on the screen. Thankfully, we've got some time for questions, a couple of minutes at least. If there are any other questions, Jason said he will forward those things over to me, and then we'll take a look at those later. But thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Dustin. Let's just get right into the questions. We do have quite a bit, so I'll only be able to ask a couple of them, and then
Okay.
I'll send you the rest of them. All right. I guess the user is there any way to access the marketplace with an on-prem setup?
The custom visualizations. I assume
Yep.
that they're talking about the custom visualizations. I don't think that the custom visualizations are supported in Power BI Report Server. I'm like 90% sure, but I have to look that one up. But I don't think that's one of the things that's supported in Power BI Report Server. But let's go back over here. Let's see if this says here. Let's see. Custom visuals. Oh, it does. It says custom visuals are available for Power BI Report Server. So that is pretty cool. I believe that if they said marketplace, I think that's what they're talking about, but not entirely sure.
Yep, they said yeah. They're
Okay,
referring
all right.
to that.
Yep. See, that's why I put the slide here in the deck because I knew it'd be helpful.
Does the free Power BI version use the Power BI service stack? This
It
is
sure
earlier
does.
on.
Yep.
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 All right.
So if you were a Power BI free user, you could still publish to the Power BI service and then access it from other devices and do all that sort of thing. The only thing you can't do with Power BI free is share it with other people.
Is there any plans of the Power BI report server replacing SSRS?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not on the product team, so. And if I did know the answer to that, you think they would let me answer that question?
Will Power BI embedded work in Power BI report server?
So Power BI Embedded is the Azure service that allows you to embed in custom applications. So you could use Power BI Embedded to embed in a custom app. If you're using Power BI Report Server, those are different services. So you wouldn't use Power BI Embedded to embed in Power BI Report Server. So I'm not sure if they meant something else different by that.
All right, two more questions and we can wrap it up. I guess this is earlier about when talking about Excel and whatnot. Power View in Excel can be exported into a PowerPoint, and I can interact with the data during presentation mode. Does that functionality still the same, or have those changed with the latest changes with Power BI?
So I'm not sure about if you're still using Power View in Excel. I believe that still works the same. I know in Power BI you can do an export to a PowerPoint, but it's not a live version of the report like you could do with Power View in Excel, where you could click and filter and do all those sorts of cool things. I know that's something that I've heard the product team talk about being able to do. I don't know where that's at on the roadmap. I know you currently can't do that. You can export to a PowerPoint, but it's not a live look at the report.
Okay. The last question is going back to earlier when you were talking about the data gateway. Do
Okay.
you user want to know, do you need a separate gateway for each data source?
No, you do not need a separate gateway for each data source. You could have a single gateway and register multiple data sources. So you could have a gateway and then have a reference to a SQL database, an Oracle database, a CSV file, a folder location, all being supported by one gateway.
Okay. All right. Well, I will export the remaining questions and send them your way.
Okay.
Also, a couple people asked about the slides. If maybe on your follow-up, if you can provide those as well. Also, the session got recorded, so we'll be
Yep.
uploading it to our YouTube page as well.
Yep. So the slides. So I did this presentation previously. If you're interested in getting the slides, if you go to SQLdusty.com and find the blog post making sense of Power BI ecosystem, you can just download the whole presentation and also get the architectural diagram here.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, thank you very much, Dustin. It was
Yeah.
a
Thanks,
great
Jason.
presentation.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
All right. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.